Right now, every person on Earth, whether they are searching for miracles or not, is actually experiencing a miracle that repeats every single second, yet they don't even realize it. Every breath you take, every step you make, even waking up in the morning, happens because of a miracle. You cannot see this miracle, but you can feel it down to every cell in your body because it is always there. It keeps you attached to the ground, allows your breathing to continue, makes your heart pump blood in the correct direction, helps your eyes function properly, and even maintains the orbit in which you revolve around the sun, along with countless other things happening because of it. So who is this hidden hero we are talking about? Of course, it is gravity. But what if one day gravity suddenly disappeared? What would happen in a single day if gravity no longer existed? The answer is far more dramatic than you can imagine. And the answers scientists give about this process, answers coming from real experiments, real astronauts, and real data, are completely shocking. Because sometimes we live in a world where events even more surprising and terrifying than science fiction can actually happen. Hey, gravity suddenly disappeared in the very first second. What do you think would happen? The very first thing you would notice is this. Your weight would change. Yes, that is absolutely true. But don't misunderstand this as simply floating, because that would be completely wrong. The Earth would still continue spinning at nearly 1,670 kilometers per hour along the equator. Without gravity, the centrifugal force created by this rotation would instantly break your contact with the ground. And it would not stop there, because without gravity, the concept of up would no longer truly exist, meaning there would barely be any proper sense of direction anymore. You would almost completely lose your ability to move. Everything on your desk, your pens, your glass, your keyboard, would lose contact with the surface at the exact same moment. The same would happen to cars outside, while trees would be ripped out from their roots. Lakes, rivers, and even entire oceans would begin rising upward like massive clouds, and unbelievably, all of these enormous events would happen within just a few seconds. Now you're beginning to understand the true power of gravity, but to fully grasp its effects, we need to go even deeper. Now let's talk about the most critical part, the atmosphere disappearing, or escaping, however you want to describe it. Without gravity, Earth's atmosphere would drift away into space because there would no longer be any force holding it down. And this would not happen slowly. According to scientists, it would happen extremely fast. Oxygen would disappear, carbon dioxide would disappear, nitrogen would disappear, and in short, life itself would come to an end. But that is not even the most disturbing part. No human would be able to speak a single word anymore because there would be no medium for sound to travel through. Without an atmosphere, sound cannot exist. Earth would suddenly become a silent planet where not even a single noise could be heard. The blue sky would vanish as well, because the sky's blue color exists only because molecules in the atmosphere scatter sunlight. Without an atmosphere, the sky would become the endless blackness of space, even during daytime. In fact, the entire concept of day and night would begin to lose its meaning. The oceans, those massive bodies of water covering 71% of Earth's surface with an average depth of 3,688 meters, would begin boiling upward into the sky because the concept of stability would no longer exist. Without gravity holding everything together, instability would dominate everywhere. But the oceans would not completely evaporate instantly. The sudden drop in atmospheric pressure would allow water to partially maintain its form, creating enormous floating spheres of water. Giant droplets would drift and scatter into space. Every form of life living in the oceans, an enormous portion of all species on Earth, would instantly lose its habitat. Fish, mammals, plants, and microorganisms would all be left without an environment to survive in within just seconds. And it still would not end there. Earth would rapidly become a desert, but not even the kind of dry desert we know today, because even deserts require an atmosphere to exist properly. Now we arrive at the most dramatic part. Once gravity disappears, Earth's crustal plates, the tectonic plates normally held against the mantle, would break free. And because Earth would still continue rotating, the force created by that rotation would begin tearing the crust apart and launching massive pieces of the planet into space. Space physicist Philip Metzger from the University of Pennsylvania explains it this way. Without gravity, while Earth continues spinning, the crustal plates begin separating from the mantle and scatter into space. The entire Earth breaks apart. And you can be sure of one thing. This process would not take very long. It does not end there. There is even more. Earth continues to orbit the sun, held in place by the gravitational pull within the solar system. Without gravity, Earth would break free from this orbit and move in a straight line into deep space, with no direction or path to guide it. Because planets do not move randomly but exist in a delicate balance within the solar system's gravitational structure. Planets, asteroids, and comets all move because of this gravitational harmony. And without gravity, the solar system would become unrecognizable within hours, as every celestial body is part of this interconnected system. Without gravity, the universe would no longer form structured systems, but instead consist of objects drifting apart in isolation. But the real answer comes from astronauts. And now we reach the part that truly surprises people. NASA has studied what would happen to the human body if gravity were completely removed. And for decades, scientists have been investigating how the human body changes in such conditions, with experimental findings that have even surprised the researchers themselves. Bones in living organisms on Earth are constantly being renewed. The continuous pressure created by gravity forces bone tissue to remain active and to regenerate itself. Without this mechanical load, bone renewal slows down and can even come to a halt. In space, astronauts can lose about 1 to 2% of their weight-bearing bone mass each month because there is no gravity. With a more precise calculation, this means a loss of around 9 to 12% over 6 months. This rate is significantly higher than the bone loss experienced by patients with osteoporosis on Earth over long periods. A study published in 2022 tracked the bodily changes of 17 astronauts for 1 year following their long-duration missions on the International Space Station. The research detected bone density loss, particularly in the tibia shin bone, with an average decrease of about 2%. Although some of this loss is gradually recovered after returning to Earth, it was observed that in some astronauts' bone density did not fully return to its original level. In 9 out of 17 astronauts, these changes were reported to leave partially permanent effects. This is a very serious risk. Now imagine gravity completely disappearing. According to NASA research, astronauts can lose 10 to 20% of their lean muscle mass within just 2 weeks of entering space. This is comparable to the muscle loss experienced by elderly patients who remain immobile for months on Earth. It is truly a shocking fact and a clear example of the physical impact of gravity. After 6 months, muscle loss can reach up to 40%, which is an even more severe condition. That is why astronauts aboard the ISS perform daily exercise routines. They run on specially designed treadmills and pedal resistance-based space bicycles. This is not just for general health. It is necessary in order to be able to walk again when they return to Earth, because the loss is so significant. But there is more. Without gravity, another critical change occurs, and it is a vital one. All fluids in the body shift upward. Gravity normally controls how blood and other fluids are distributed in the body, keeping more of them in the lower parts such as the legs. The heart works based on this balance, maintaining a stable circulation system. In microgravity, this balance is disrupted, which is why astronauts often develop puffy face and bird leg syndrome, where the face becomes swollen while the legs appear thinner. Fluid pressure in the head increases, and this pressure affects the brain, which begins to adapt and change in response to these conditions. A 2020 MRI study showed changes in brain volume in astronauts returning from long-duration space missions. Researchers observed an increase in cerebrospinal fluid, expansion of white matter, and changes in the shape of the pituitary gland, a small but vital structure often referred to as the master gland because it regulates many hormones. Unfortunately, it was also reported that some individuals in this group were no longer alive 1 year later. But perhaps the most surprising findings were related to the eyes. More than 60% of astronauts who spent extended periods in space experienced vision problems. Some became unable to see distant objects clearly, while others developed changes in the shape of the eyeball, where it becomes slightly flattened instead of maintaining its normal round structure. Additional issues such as swelling of the optic nerve and retinal hemorrhaging were also documented. This condition is known as SANS, spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome. Now let's look at one of the most interesting experiments in science. Scott Kelly and Mark Kelly are identical twin brothers, both NASA astronauts and genetically identical. In 2015, NASA conducted a special experiment in which Scott spent 340 days aboard the International Space Station, while Mark remained on Earth for the same period as a control subject. At the end of the study, Scientists discovered that Scott and Mark were no longer exactly the same. Their DNA had not changed, but gene expression had. Which genes were active, which were suppressed, and how much protein was being produced, all of these factors had shifted. 6 months after Scott returned to Earth, most of these changes reversed, but about 7% remained altered, particularly genes related to DNA repair and bone formation. Physically, Scott had also grown about 2 centimeters in space because his spine expanded without gravitational compression, though he returned to his original height after coming back to Earth. Geneticist Michael Snyder from Stanford University explained these changes by saying, "These are natural responses to stress, but they show how deep the stress of space really is." What would happen to Earth's vegetation? Tests conducted on the ISS produced quite unusual results. Plants have a growth mechanism called gravitropism, where roots grow downward and stems grow upward, and this orientation can normally be clearly observed. However, in space conditions, it is not clear in which direction roots will grow. Some plants grow in spiral shapes, some form tangled clusters, and others try to find direction using light as a guide. A 2012 study showed that bean seeds in space experienced about a 40% slower root growth rate because cellular functions were partially disrupted. In a world without gravity, it is very difficult to predict how vegetation would develop. In other words, plants are also highly dependent on gravity. Without plants, agriculture and the oxygen cycle would collapse, leading to a similar overall outcome. According to another NASA finding, the heart also changes shape in microgravity. While on Earth, the heart has a slightly elongated, oval structure. In space, this pressure is removed and it becomes more rounded. And this is not just a visual change, because it also affects pumping efficiency. A more spherical heart works less efficiently, and long-term weakening of the heart muscle can occur. In addition, the blood vessels that help regulate circulation lose some of their resilience, which is why astronauts returning to Earth can sometimes faint when they stand up, as their vascular system can no longer support blood flow as it used to. Now let's return to the original question. What would happen if there were no gravity? We have actually seen how critical this force is, from the destructive effects in the very first seconds to the order of planets and even the structure of the solar system. Just as water is essential for life, gravity plays an equally fundamental, if not greater role. I hope this helps you better understand how important this invisible force really is. Don't forget to subscribe and follow for more interesting content. Wishing everyone a gravity-filled day.